Owning a home in a quiet suburban neighborhood was supposed to be a dream. For me, it was the reward of years of hard work, long shifts, sacrifices, and saving every dollar until I could finally afford a place I could call mine. My house wasn't the biggest on the block nor the flashiest, but it was comfortable. The front lawn was neatly trimmed, a small flower bed lined the porch, and my driveway stretched long enough to park both my car and my wife's without spilling into the street. To me, it was perfect. Every time I came home from work, parking in that driveway gave me a little sense of peace, like closing the final chapter of a long day. I'd step out of the car, hear the faint hum of sprinklers from a neighbor's yard, and know I was finally home. For years, everything ran smoothly. No conflicts, no problems. At least not until the morning I discovered the first notice taped to my front door. The paper was hard to miss. Bold red lettering across the top screamed, "Violation Notice." At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. I carried it, inside, coffee mug in hand, and unfolded the page at my kitchen table. The words didn't make sense to me. "You are hereby fined for illegal parking in violation of community rules. Immediate corrective action required. Illegal parking." The accusation was laughable. Where had I supposedly parked illegally? I lived in a quiet cul-de-sac. I didn't block anyone's property, and I never left my car on the street. The only place I parked was right there, my own driveway. I reread the notice 3 times, convinced I must be misunderstanding it. But no, it clearly stated my address, my vehicle description, and the penalty, a $50 fine. Shaking my head, I chuckled to myself. Must be a clerical error, I thought. Maybe the HOA mixed me up with another resident. These things happen. I placed the notice on the counter and decided not to worry. But just 3 days later, another envelope appeared, taped in the exact same spot on my front door. This one was even sterner than the first. The violation now claimed I was in repeated offense, and the fine had jumped to $100. That's when my amusement turned into irritation. This wasn't just a one-off mistake. It was a deliberate action. Someone was reporting me. Someone was pushing this forward. I pulled out the thick HOA handbook we'd been given when we first moved in. It was the kind of document most people shoved into a drawer and forgot, filled with page after page of dense rules written in soulless legal jargon. I scanned through the sections on parking, street restrictions, no commercial vehicles, abandoned cars needing removal. But nowhere did it say anything about not parking in your own driveway. In fact, the idea itself sounded absurd. What else was a driveway for, if not parking? The realization made my stomach tighten. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. Someone was twisting the system to target me, and they had the HOA's backing to do it. Still, I tried to remain calm. It's just a misunderstanding, I told myself. I'll call the HOA office, explain the situation, and they'll fix it. But that uneasy feeling lingered, as though this wasn't going to be as simple as making a phone call. That night, I pulled into my driveway as usual. Yet this time, the simple act of parking my car didn't feel normal. My headlights swept across the quiet houses, and I couldn't shake the thought that someone was watching. Somewhere behind one of those darkened windows, a pair of eyes was, waiting, eager to pounce the moment I stepped out of my car. The next morning, my suspicions were confirmed. Another violation notice, another fine. This time, the letter included a chilling line. Further noncompliance will result in escalated action, including potential towing of vehicles. That was when I felt my first real flash of anger. Tow my car? From my own driveway? That wasn't just overstepping. It was insanity. And then, as if the universe wanted to remove any doubt about who was behind this, I saw her. She was standing across the street, holding a clipboard, her posture stiff, her eyes sharp and judgmental. Even from a distance, her expression carried that smug, self-righteous energy I had seen in so many stories online. She didn't look away when I noticed her watching me. Instead, she scribbled something on her clipboard, almost daring me to come over and ask what she was doing. I didn't need an introduction. I didn't need anyone to tell me her name. Every neighborhood has one. The self-appointed enforcer. The self-righteous watchdog who lives for conflict. This was my Karen, and she wasn't just any resident. She was a leading voice in the HOA. What started as a ridiculous mistake had just escalated into something far more dangerous. I wasn't just dealing with fines. I was dealing with a woman who had influence, authority, and an endless thirst for control. In that moment, I realized the war had only just begun, and I wasn't planning on losing. The morning after spotting Karen across the street, the neighborhood didn't feel the same anymore. The rows of identical houses and neatly trimmed lawns, once symbols of peace and stability, now felt staged, like I was living on a chessboard where every move was being watched and judged. My driveway, my sanctuary after a long day's work, had become ground zero for a war I hadn't asked for. I decided it was time to confront the HOA directly. With the notices in hand, I marched into their office that afternoon. The HOA president, a balding man named Mr. Whitaker, sat behind a polished desk stacked with binders, papers, and a little golden nameplate that tried too hard to project authority. His smile was thin, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, and I immediately understood that this was a man who had gotten used to people submitting to his rules. I laid the violation notices in front of him and explained the absurdity of the situation. "I'm parking in my own driveway," I said firmly. "Show me in the handbook where that's against the rules." He adjusted his glasses and leafed through one of the binders, barely glancing at me. "Well," he began in that slow, patronizing tone people use when they've already decided they're right. "We've had complaints. Some residents feel your vehicle violates the community's aesthetic guidelines. Large vehicles, you know, can detract from the neighborhood's appearance." My jaw tightened. My car was a standard SUV, nothing oversized, nothing unusual. Half the families on the block drove vehicles just like it. "So let me get this straight," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're fining me not because of a written rule, but because someone doesn't like the way my car looks in my driveway?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tapped his pen against the desk and finally muttered, "It was brought to our attention by a board member. We take those complaints seriously." That was all I needed to hear. A board member. In other words, Karen. I walked out of that office more furious than when I went in. It wasn't about my car, and it wasn't about the HOA protecting property values. This was personal. Karen was using her position on the board to target me, bending vague language in the handbook into weapons. And worse, the HOA president was perfectly happy to let it happen. The following week only confirmed it. Every time I parked in my driveway, another violation notice appeared. It didn't matter if I pulled closer to the garage, if I adjusted my angle, or even if I left for work before sunrise and came home after dark. Karen always found something to write down, and the HOA always backed her up. One morning, I decided to test my theory. Instead of parking in the driveway, I parked on the street directly in front of my house. Technically, this was riskier. The handbook had strict rules about street parking overnight, but I wanted to see what Karen would do. The next morning, like clockwork, another violation notice. But this time, the offense wasn't driveway parking. Instead, it was blocking sightlines of the road. Never mind that my car was parked legally, exactly where dozens of other residents parked theirs. The message was clear. It didn't matter where I parked. As long as Karen had eyes on me, I would be fined. That's when the neighbors started noticing. A few whispered conversations began when I walked past. People asked casually, "Everything okay with the HOA?" Some even admitted they had received similar notices in the past, usually after some petty disagreement with Karen. But unlike them, I wasn't about to roll over and pay just to keep the peace. My breaking point came one evening when I returned from work to find not just a notice, but a bright orange sticker slapped onto my windshield. Tow warning. Final notice. The bold. Letters made my blood boil. They were threatening to tow my car from my own property. The audacity of it was almost laughable, but I wasn't laughing. I peeled the sticker off with shaking hands and crumpled it in my fist. Karen was standing on her porch across the street, arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across her face. She wanted me to see her. She wanted me to know that this was her doing. For the first time, I let my eyes lock onto hers, and I didn't look away. It was a silent exchange, but the message was clear. She thought she had won. She thought I would break under the pressure, pay the fines, and beg her for mercy. But Karen had underestimated me. That night, instead of sleeping, I sat at my desk and began my own investigation. I dug through the HOA handbook again, highlighting every section on parking. I read state laws about homeowners' rights and property boundaries. I scoured online forums where others had shared their battles with overreaching HOAs. The more I learned, the angrier I became, but also the more determined. Karen was abusing her power, but abuse only worked if people stayed quiet. What she hadn't counted on was someone willing to fight back with facts, persistence, and evidence. Over the next few days, I installed a small security camera facing my driveway. Every time I parked, the camera recorded it. Every time I received a violation notice, I checked the footage. It wasn't hard to catch her. There she was, strutting up my walkway, clipboard in hand, slipping the notice under my door. Sometimes she even paused to take photos of my car with her phone, as if she were collecting evidence for her crusade. The first time I watched the footage, I felt a surge of triumph. Finally, I had proof. Proof that this wasn't about rules. It was about Karen's personal vendetta. Proof that she was harassing me, and as I stared at the screen, watching her scuttle away after planting yet another bogus violation, a plan began to form. Karen had been playing this game for weeks, using the HOA like her personal army. But she had forgotten something important. Games go both ways, and I was ready to make my move. With the footage from my new security camera, the balance of power began to shift. For weeks, Karen had controlled the narrative. She wrote the notices, she spread her poison through the HOA board, and she carried herself as though her word was law. But now I had something she couldn't spin, raw, unfiltered video proof of her harassment. The first few clips were enough to establish a pattern. Karen, marching up my driveway with her clipboard, dropping notices under my door like she was serving royal decrees. Each time, she lingered just long enough to snap a few photos, checking angles, almost savoring the act. She never went to other houses, only mine. She was obsessed, and I had the receipts. Still, I knew better than to rush into a confrontation. Evidence is most powerful when it's overwhelming, undeniable. So I decided to wait, letting her dig, her own hole deeper and deeper. Every day I parked in my driveway as usual, and every day Karen delivered another violation notice. My folder grew thicker by the week. Orange tow stickers, threats of escalating fines, even one letter claiming that continued infractions could result in legal action from the HOA. Each one slipped neatly into my growing arsenal, and all the while my camera rolled. It wasn't just Karen either. Occasionally, I caught her chatting with the HOA president, Mr. Whitaker, in front of my house. She would gesture toward my driveway, flailing her arms like a director staging a play, while he nodded along. The sight of them together infuriated me, but it also gave me something priceless: confirmation that the HOA leadership was complicit in her vendetta. What Karen didn't realize was that while she was documenting my so-called violations, I was documenting her abuse of power. Meanwhile, the neighbors were starting to talk more openly. People I barely knew began stopping me on walks, lowering their voices and confessing their own run-ins with Karen. One family said she fined them for leaving holiday decorations up too long. Another whispered that she once threatened to report their teenage son for loitering in front of his own house. Everyone had a Karen story, but no one had ever stood up to her. "Be careful," one elderly neighbor warned me one afternoon. "She's been on the board for years. She knows how to twist the rules. People who fight her usually regret it." I smiled politely, but inside, I was more determined than ever. Karen's reign of fear had gone unchallenged because no one had dared to shine a light on it. But I wasn't just anyone. I had proof, patience, and a plan. That plan began with organization. I created a digital archive cataloging every notice, every letter, every sticker, and every minute of camera footage. I labeled them with dates, times, and descriptions. If this ever escalated into a real legal battle, I wanted everything in order, airtight, and undeniable. The archive grew faster than I expected. Within a month, I had more than a dozen separate videos of Karen trespassing onto my property to deliver her bogus notices. In one particularly damning clip, she was caught, laughing into her phone as she stuck a toe sticker on my windshield. The malice was obvious, and I knew anyone who saw that video would immediately understand what I had been dealing with. But I wasn't done. I started researching HOA bylaws more thoroughly, cross-referencing them with local and state property laws. And what I discovered was explosive. The HOA handbook had no enforceable rule prohibiting me from parking in my driveway. The vague aesthetic guidelines Karen kept citing weren't legally binding. They were suggestions, not enforceable regulations. Karen wasn't just harassing me. She was weaponizing non-existent rules, and the HOA was enabling it. That's when my strategy shifted. Instead of just defending myself, I realized I had the chance to expose Karen completely, not just to the HOA board, but to the entire neighborhood. I began quietly sharing bits of information with trusted neighbors. Over coffee or casual conversations, I'd mention how Karen had been targeting me, how she trespassed almost daily, how she made up rules that didn't exist. And then, when the time felt right, I'd show them a short clip from my security footage. The reaction was always the same: shock followed by anger. People who had once been afraid to speak out now had proof that their experiences weren't isolated. Karen wasn't just strict. She was vindictive. She wasn't protecting the community. She was controlling it. Soon, the whispers grew into a buzz. Karen's name was on everyone's lips, and not in the way she liked. Of course, Karen remained oblivious. She strutted around the neighborhood with the same smug expression, acting as though she was untouchable. She kept dropping her notices, confident that I was either breaking under the pressure or preparing to give in. What she didn't know was that every step she took brought her closer to her downfall. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. The HOA scheduled its quarterly community meeting, the one where residents were encouraged to voice their concerns. Normally, attendance was low. People didn't want to waste their evenings listening to board members drone on about landscaping budgets or pool maintenance fees. But this time, I saw an opening. This was my chance to present my evidence, not just to the board, but to the entire community. In the days leading up to the meeting, I prepared carefully. I compiled the most incriminating clips into a single video, splicing together Karen's repeated trespassing, her bogus notices, her laughter, her smug little gestures. I made copies of the handbook sections proving there was no rule against driveway parking, and I printed out every violation notice she had issued me, organizing them into a neat binder that told the story from start to finish. By the night of the meeting, I was ready. As I walked into the community center, binder in hand, I noticed Karen already seated at the front of the room, her clipboard resting in her lap like a knight's shield. She gave me that same smug smile, the one she always wore when she thought she had me cornered. But this time I smiled back, because tonight, the board and the neighborhood would see the real Karen. And once they did, there would be no going back. The community center buzzed with more voices than I had ever heard at an HOA meeting. Normally, only a handful of bored homeowners showed up, but tonight nearly every seat was filled. Word had spread, whispers of Karen's harassment had caught fire, and people were curious to see what would unfold. I sat midway down the aisle, binder in hand, laptop in my bag. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with anticipation. For weeks, I had been patient, gathering evidence, building my case. Tonight, the spotlight wouldn't just shine on me. It would burn Karen for all to see. The HOA president, Mr. Whitaker, stood at the podium, adjusting his glasses as he cleared his throat. He droned through the opening agenda: budget adjustments, landscaping maintenance, pool repairs. Nobody cared. Everyone was waiting for one thing. Finally, he asked, "Does anyone have new business or concerns to bring forward?" I raised my hand. Karen's head snapped toward me instantly. Her smug grin widened, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment. She probably thought I was about to beg the board for mercy. Instead, I calmly stood, walked to the front of the room, and laid my binder on the podium. "Yes," I said, "I do." The room went quiet. "I've been repeatedly harassed and fined by a member of this board," I began, locking eyes with Karen. Her smile faltered for the first time. "I was told that parking in my own driveway violates HOA rules, but according to the official handbook, no such rule exists. What's worse, I've been given more than a dozen violation notices, all delivered with threats of towing and legal action." Karen shifted in her seat, gripping her clipboard like it could shield her. "And to prove it," I continued, sliding my laptop onto the podium, "I brought evidence." The projector flickered to life, and my carefully edited video began to play. Clip after clip flashed across the screen. Karen sneaking up to my driveway, slapping stickers on my car, slipping notices under my door. One clip showed her laughing into her phone as she planted a violation notice. Another showed her whispering, with Whitaker in front of my house, pointing dramatically at my driveway like it was a crime scene. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors craned forward, whispering to each other. Karen's face turned red, her lips pressed into a thin line. "And here," I said, holding up the binder, "are copies of every notice I've received. Not one of them cites an actual enforceable rule. I've highlighted the handbook sections for everyone to see. This isn't about rules, this is about harassment." I laid the binder open on the podium. Dozens of orange toe stickers and letters stared back at the audience like neon proof of her obsession. For a moment, the room was silent. Then from the back, someone muttered, "I knew it." Another voice added, "She did the same thing to us." The whispers grew louder, spreading like wildfire. Karen finally shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's cherry-picking. Those clips are taken out of context. I was enforcing the rules." I met her glare calmly. "Which rules, Karen? Show me in the handbook where it says I can't park in my own driveway. Please, educate us." The silence that followed was deafening. She flipped open her clipboard, shuffling papers frantically, but her hands trembled. No rule existed, and everyone knew it. Neighbors started to murmur louder now, their frustration boiling over. "She fined me for Christmas lights. She told my kids they couldn't skateboard. She said my fence paint was too bright." Voices layered over each other until it was no longer a meeting but a storm. Karen's empire of intimidation was collapsing in real time, crushed under the weight of her own arrogance. Whitaker tried to regain control, banging his gavel. "Order. Order, please." But the residents weren't listening. For the first time in years, they weren't afraid. Finally, a man near the front stood and addressed the board directly. "This is unacceptable. We elected you to protect this neighborhood, not terrorize it. If this is how our HOA operates, then we need new leadership." Applause erupted, real, thunderous applause that made Karen flinch. Her face was beet red now, and she sputtered, "You don't understand. He's making this personal. He's twisting things." But no one was buying it. Whitaker, seeing the tide turn, tried to salvage what little authority he had left. "Perhaps," he said nervously, "we should form a committee to review these concerns." "No," Another neighbor cut in. "We've had enough. We're calling for a vote." The energy in the room surged, voices rising together. "Vote! Vote! Vote!" Karen's eyes darted around the room, desperate for support. But all she saw were cold, angry faces. People she had bullied for years were now standing together, united against her. I didn't even have to push further. My work was done. The evidence had spoken louder than any words I could have used. The HOA board, flustered and cornered, finally agreed to hold a special election. Karen's position, and Whitaker's, were suddenly hanging by a thread. Karen stormed out of the meeting before it even ended, her heels clicking furiously against the tile floor. The door slammed behind her, but the sound was drowned by the cheers of neighbors who finally felt free to breathe. For the first time since this war began, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The community had seen the truth. Karen wasn't invincible anymore. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She had been embarrassed, humiliated in front of everyone she once controlled. And people, like Karen, don't forgive or forget. As the crowd dispersed, neighbors patted me on the back, thanking me, promising their support. I smiled, nodded, accepted their words, but inside I was already preparing, because Karen would be back, and the next round of this war was going to be even uglier. Karen didn't show her face for the next few days, but her silence wasn't peace. It was a storm gathering strength. At first, the neighborhood buzzed with optimism. People waved at me, stopped to chat, thanked me for standing up to the HOA bully. For the first time in years, the community felt united. The special election was scheduled, and everyone whispered about how Karen and Whitaker were finally going to be voted out. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Humiliation only made her dangerous. The first sign came 3 days later. I walked outside one morning to find my trash cans tipped over, garbage scattered across the lawn. At first, I thought it was raccoons, until I noticed the perfectly folded HOA violation notice taped to my mailbox. Failure to maintain curb. Appeal, $150 fine. I laughed bitterly. Even after being exposed, Karen still couldn't resist her petty games. But this time, I didn't react. I cleaned up the mess, snapped a photo from my growing archive, and went about my day. The next attack came a week later. Late at night, I heard footsteps near my driveway. I peeked through the blinds and saw Karen's car idling across the street. A figure, someone small, probably her, darted up, slapped another neon orange toe sticker on my windshield, and scurried back. It was pathetic. But it was also a warning. She wasn't done. 2 days later, my internet suddenly cut out. After hours on the phone with the provider, they discovered someone had submitted a service cancellation request in my name. The rep even chuckled and said, "Guess someone doesn't like you very much." Karen had escalated from petty fines to sabotage. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at my growing evidence folder. Part of me wanted to slam it all online, upload the videos, share the files, let the internet roast her into oblivion. But another part of me wanted to wait. Timing was everything. If I struck too early, she might wiggle out of it again. No, I needed patience. Still, Karen was unraveling faster than I expected. 2 houses down, Mrs. Rodriguez told me Karen had knocked on her door, ranting about me. "She said you were dangerous, and that you're trying to destroy the HOA. She even tried to get me to sign some petition against you," she whispered. I told her no. Everyone did. The more Karen pushed, the more isolated she became. But desperation makes people reckless. The breaking point came the night of the neighborhood block party. It was supposed to be a cheerful event. Food trucks, music, kids playing in the street. I was hesitant to go, knowing Karen would be there. But several neighbors insisted I come. "You've got nothing to worry about," they said. "We're all on your side now." I should have listened to my gut. When I arrived, Karen was already waiting. She stood near the food tables, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. For most of the evening, she hovered nearby, muttering insults just loud enough for people to hear. Rule breaker. Troublemaker. Loser. I ignored her. Everyone else did too. But then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Karen snapped. I was chatting with a couple of neighbors when she stormed over, wineglass in hand, and shouted, "You think you've won, don't you?" Her voice carried across the entire party. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. "You think you can come in here, park wherever you want, break every rule, and make me the villain?" she screamed, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You're a liar! You edited those videos! You manipulated everyone!" Her words spilled out like venom, loud and desperate. She was red-faced, sweating, eyes wild. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just let her dig her own grave. "Do you people not see what he's doing?" she shrieked, spinning to the crowd. "He's trying to take over this neighborhood. He's dangerous. He's... But her tirade was cut short by her own clumsiness. She swung her arm too wide, and the wine glass flew from her hand, shattering across the pavement. Red liquid splashed onto a child's white shirt. The boy burst into tears. His mother rushed forward, furious. Gasps echoed around the block. Neighbors backed away, disgusted. Someone muttered, "She's lost it." Karen froze, realizing what she had done. For the first time, her mask slipped entirely. She looked weak, not powerful, not intimidating, just a woman unraveling in front of everyone. And then came the final blow. Mr. Whitaker, the HOA president, her longtime ally, stepped forward and said, "Karen, that's enough." The crowd stared. He had always backed her up, always defended her, but now even he couldn't stomach her behavior. Karen stammered, "But he's—" "No, Whitaker." Cut her off, voice firm. "This isn't about him anymore, it's about you. And you've gone too far." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen looked around, but no one was on her side. Neighbors turned away, shaking their heads. Some openly glared at her. Others whispered, phones already recording. Karen's empire had officially crumbled. She stormed off into the night, her heels clacking furiously against the pavement. The sound faded, but the damage was permanent. The block party slowly resumed, but the air was different now, lighter, freer. People laughed again, music returned, kids played without fear, but I could still feel the weight of what had just happened. Karen wasn't finished. I could see it in her eyes before she left. Hatred, burning hotter than ever. And I knew this war wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was personal. The night after the block party, I couldn't sleep. Karen's meltdown replayed in my mind, her screaming, the shattered wine glass, the look of betrayal when even Whitaker turned against her. For the first time since this nightmare began, it felt like the tide had truly shifted. But I also knew people like Karen don't just vanish quietly. She would be scheming, clawing for some way to regain control. And if I wanted this war to end, I had to deliver the final blow myself. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I'd been compiling for weeks. Dozens of photos, video clips, HOA documents, and audio recordings. Every petty violation notice, every harassing message, every moment Karen had gone too far. It was all there. And then I saw the crown jewel, a video I almost forgot about. Month earlier, during one of her late-night rants outside my house, my security camera caught Karen admitting something explosive. She'd bragged to Whitaker that she fined people just to teach them lessons, and even laughed about pocketing late fee money before it hit the HOA books. At the time, I thought it was just her big mouth running wild. But now, with everything else, it was undeniable evidence of misconduct. I knew exactly what to do. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Rumors were already flying that the community planned to vote out Whitaker and Karen. This was my moment. When the night arrived, the room was packed. More residents than I'd ever seen show up. People stood along the walls, arms crossed, waiting. for fireworks. Whitaker sat stiffly at the head table, sweat already glistening on his forehead. Karen sat beside him, her face tight with forced calm, like a kettle about to boil over. When it came time for community concerns, I raised my hand. Dozens of heads turned. "Mr. Chairman," I began, standing slowly, "I have something to share with the community tonight." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Here we go," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. I ignored her and connected my laptop to the projector. The first image appeared on the screen, one of Karen's many bogus violation notices, taped to my door. Then came photos of my vandalized trash cans, the tow stickers on my car, the screenshots of my canceled internet service. Gasps filled the room. Next, I played a short video clip, Karen sneaking up at night to slap a tow sticker on my windshield. Someone in the back whispered, "Unbelievable!" Karen jumped to her feet. "This is harassment. You can't just—" I held up a hand. "I'm not finished." And then I played the recording. Karen's voice filled the room, dripping with arrogance. "I fine people just to teach them lessons. Half the time they pay late, and guess who pockets the fee before it ever makes the books? Me!" The room erupted. Shock, anger, shouting. Neighbors turned on her instantly. People she once controlled with fear, now glaring at her like predators circling prey. Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, That's out of context!" But it was too late. Whitaker slammed, his gavel trying to restore order, but his voice was drowned out by the crowd demanding answers. Finally, someone shouted, "Vote them out!" and the chant spread like wildfire. "Vote them out! Vote them out!" Whitaker's composure shattered. He fumbled with his papers, mumbling something about procedures, but the residents weren't having it. They demanded an immediate vote of no confidence. And for the first time in years, Whitaker realized he was no longer in control. The vote was unanimous. Both Karen and Whitaker were stripped of their positions on the spot. Karen's shriek cut through the chaos. "You can't do this to me! I built this HOA! I kept you all in line!" Her voice cracked into hysteria as people booed and shouted for her to leave. Security, yes, the HOA had to call in security, stepped forward to escort her out. She clawed at the table, knocking over water bottles and papers, screaming curses at me, at the board, at anyone who dared look her way. "This isn't over," she howled as they dragged her toward the door. "You'll regret this. All of you will regret this." The door slammed behind her, and just like that, the reign of HOA Karen was over. The room fell silent for a moment. Then applause erupted, louder than I'd ever heard in that dull, gray meeting room. Neighbors clapped, cheered, some even hugged each other. For once, justice had been served. As the new interim board was voted in, several residents approached me. Mrs. Rodriguez patted my odd arm, saying, "You saved this neighborhood." Others thanked me for having the courage to stand up when no one else could. I felt lighter. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Walking home that night, I glanced toward Karen's house. Her windows were dark, curtains drawn tight. For years, she had terrorized this community, but now she was nothing more than a bitter memory. I knew she might still try something. People like her don't give up easily, but she no longer had power. And without power, she was just another angry voice lost in the crowd. The next morning, I found something unusual. A single sheet of paper taped to my door. No fine, no threat, just 3 words scrawled in angry handwriting. "You got lucky." I tore it down, smiled, and tossed it in the trash. Because I knew the truth. It wasn't luck. It was patience. It was evidence. It was refusing to be bullied one more day. And for the first time, this neighborhood truly belonged to the people who lived in it, not to an HOA tyrant and certainly not to Karen. The night Karen was dragged out of the HOA meeting, I thought that was the end of it. And in many ways it was. The end of her unchecked power, her reign of pettiness, and her grip over the neighborhood. But what came after was almost more fascinating. than the battles themselves. For the first time in years, our community started to heal. The new interim board, composed of regular homeowners, not power-hungry tyrants, called a special meeting the very next week. Gone was the heavy-handed us versus them attitude. Instead, they invited feedback, listened patiently, and actually asked residents what we wanted from the HOA. It was strange. Meetings that used to feel like courtroom trials now felt like community potlucks. People actually laughed, shared snacks, and shook hands. The first order of business was auditing the HOA's finances. Sure enough, Karen's fingerprints were all over the books. Dozens of mysterious fees, missing funds, and petty fines that didn't align with proper accounting. The new treasurer called it a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight into Karen's pockets. The board voted unanimously to press charges. And while I didn't relish seeing someone's life collapse, part of me felt it was overdue. She hadn't just been a nuisance. She had exploited an entire neighborhood for her own ego and profit. Word spread fast when the county investigators got involved. Soon, Karen wasn't just the HOA tyrant. She was the subject of an ongoing fraud case. Neighbors whispered about it at the mailbox, at the park, even while walking their dogs. For once, people weren't afraid of her. They pitied her, or worse, laughed at her. Meanwhile, my own life slowly shifted back to normal. I no longer woke up to violation notices taped to my door. My driveway remained blissfully fine-free. The tow stickers stopped, the mysterious utility shutoffs ceased, and for the first time in months, I actually looked forward to pulling into my neighborhood after work. But the strangest change wasn't the peace, it was the friendships. See, during the battle, I had stood alone in the spotlight, the guy who fought Karen. But afterward, neighbors who had once kept their heads down started to reach out. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me cookies. Mr. Patel, who lived 2 houses down, offered to help me with a backyard project. Even the retired couple across the street invited me over for wine one evening. For years, Karen had thrived by keeping us divided, suspicious of one another. Without her, the walls came down and a real community began to grow. But Karen herself, well, she didn't vanish quietly. A few weeks after her ousting, I spotted her outside her house, screaming on the phone, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Her lawn grew ragged, the once pristine flower beds wilting under neglect. Her infamous, perfectly trimmed hedges began to sprout uneven patches. It was as if her obsession with controlling others had left her unable to care for herself. Some said she tried to rally supporters to reinstate her authority. Others claimed she sent angry letters to the county, accusing the new board of corruption. But her words no longer carried weight. She was just a bitter voice, ignored by the very people she once commanded. And then came the news. Karen had been officially charged with financial misconduct tied to HOA funds. The fraud wasn't massive by corporate standards, but for a suburban HOA, it was serious. Fines, restitution, possible probation. It was enough to ruin her carefully curated image. When the local paper ran the headline, "Former HOA board member accused of misusing community funds." Neighbors passed copies around like souvenirs. The photo they used of Karen looked nothing like the perfectly polished woman she pretended to be. Her face was tight with rage, her eyes wild, her hair slightly out of place. Her reign was officially over. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came months later, during a community barbecue. The new board hosted it as a celebration of moving forward. Kids played in sprinklers. Neighbors shared food. Music filled the cul-de-sac. As I stood there, plate of ribs in hand, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Whitaker, the former HOA president. He looked older, smaller somehow, without the boardroom authority. His voice was quiet. "I should have stopped her," he admitted. "Karen, she ran the show. I let her get away with too much. I thought keeping her happy kept the community under control. I was wrong." For the first time, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I nodded, not with forgiveness, but with a sense of closure. He walked away without another word. The rest of the evening was filled with laughter, fireworks, and chatter about the future. Things Karen would have sneered at, things she would have fined us for. But now, they felt like symbols of freedom. Looking back, I realized something important. This entire ordeal had been about more than parking spots, fines, or even Karen herself. It had been about power, how fragile it really is, and how dangerous it becomes when concentrated in the wrong hands. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought rules were weapons and people were pawns. But in the end, all it took was persistence, evidence, and unity to bring her down. As the night ended, I looked around at my neighbors, the same people who once whispered in fear, now laughing openly together. And I knew this was the real victory. Karen had lost everything. We had gained a community, and that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all.